How far can I control my mind?
All right, welcome back to Hour 2 of Dr. J Radio Live. Travis Walton and filmmaker Tracy Torme. Travis and Tracy, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Great to be here.
Great to be here, Dr. J.
It's an absolute honor to have both of you on at the same time. And Tracy, I believe this is our first time on record finally speaking. So I'm actually really excited to speak to both of you and give the listeners out there a good preview of what you're going to be speaking about when we actually get to this April 4th event. Let me backtrack first and go direct the first question to Tracy. Tracy, were you interested in ufology prior to you hearing about Travis's case, or what made you go down the path of taking a case such as Travis's and putting it into the mainstream media as you did with the film Fire in the Sky?
Yes, I was always interested, and when I went to film school at USC, I made a decision when I was there that I wanted to do sort of the penultimate UFO film. I had sort of been a little bit dissatisfied with Close Encounters. I think there's a lot of good things about Close Encounters, but there were certain things about it that really I did not like. And so I did have an idea from a pretty early stage that I wanted to do a UFO film at some point in my career.
Now, when was it that you actually met Travis and started looking into his case as being the one that you wanted to write about and in essence show on the big screen?
Well, I owned the rights to the book Missing Time by Bud Hopkins, and I actually spent 3 years in Hollywood trying to launch that as a movie. And at that time, really, people were not familiar with abductions, and so after a sort of a long, frustrating time of trying to launch that, I thought, well, maybe what I need is the best abduction story of all time. And I was of the mind back then that was the Travis Walton story.
And I second that motion. I definitely agree it is, with all the evidence, the physical evidence, that even at the trees that you could still see the growth there, all the witnesses, the fact that he was gone for so long. Just so much about it. Now, I know we don't need to relive this, Travis. We go through this pretty much every time. But I'm just going to ask you one question regarding what happened November 5th, 1975. In the past, you've stated what happened, essentially, that you got out of the truck. You were kind of show-off-ish, if you want to put that term, in front of your friends, and something hit you, and that's what rendered you unconscious, and your friends took off. Recently, you started to say that you don't think that the extraterrestrials necessarily took you because they wanted to do any experiments on you, but that more so they took you as an ambulance call to save your life. And I'm starting to look at your case through those lenses and really starting to see that makes more sense. When did you start to realize that this may have been more of an ambulance call than it would have the other cases of literally just being plucked out of their homes and studied?
Well, it was kind of a gradual process, you know. It was just an accumulation of things over time that just kept pointing in that direction. Plus, you know, having enough time to get over the overriding emotional impact that it had on me at the time, which, of course, was negative. And, you know, Fire in the Sky did a very good job of portraying that. But, you know, as time went on, I realized that my negative perceptions had more to do with the circumstances that I was in rather than their actual intention. You know, people are always talking about the alien agenda in the singular, and I believe there's probably as many agendas as there are species, and I think there's quite a few species.
I would definitely have to agree that with so many different... If there's life on, for instance, just on our planet, going across the pond, you have a different agenda within humanity. If you have species that are completely different in makeup, in their culture, I just imagine that the agendas are completely opposite on that end. Now, let's talk specifically about alien abduction as a whole. I personally think that this is the route that people need to be studying, since this is where you're going to find your answers. If you're looking at UFO sightings reports and you're actually looking at the film of what you've recorded in the sky, that's not going to give you an idea of how these extraterrestrials interact, how these extraterrestrials deal with their machinery, or anything along the lines of giving you an insight into their agenda. Tracy, when you said people didn't know much about alien abduction and you really wanted to put the best case out there, I get the impression that you recognize the importance of why alien abduction is so important, because to me, I think it has the answers there. Do you feel that's the reason that you chose alien abduction topic per se, rather than crash and retrievals or anything else available within ufology?
Well, again, I'm not trying to make the same reference the second time, but Hopkins had a very strong influence on me. I got to know him quite well, and I used to, when I was working at Saturday Night Live in New York, he was living in New York, and he used to call me up and invite me over to sit in on his abduction sessions. So there were many times that I would go into Greenwich Village and be sort of the witness of his sessions, of his hypnotic sessions with abductees. That's how I met Kathy from Intruders, Debbie Jordan, I guess. And so I think that he had a lot of influence on me in realizing that this was a very important thing that was going on and was sort of groundbreaking at that time. And I didn't originally lean in that direction, but again, sort of getting to know Hopkins, and then I was actually the person that introduced David Jacobs to Bud Hopkins and got them together as well. So I sort of got involved in abductions by accident, but it did have a very strong influence on me after the stuff that I had witnessed.
And now, Travis, you obviously, I would imagine, being in your position, all the questions over the last 40 years, probably one of the first people ask you is, what do they look like? What do they talk like? And essentially the same reason why I think everybody needs to look at alien abduction as having the answers to what we're looking for in ufology. Because you've had to answer those same questions thousands upon thousands of times, would you say to anybody out there who's also experienced this that they too should step forward, because they are they hold missing keys to the puzzles that other ufologists need to be looking at?
Well, you know, whether people come forward or not, I've always told them is an individual choice. They have to look at how it's going to affect their lives, their own psyche, those immediate family members and associates, not just the world at large. Of course, it would be beneficial for people to come forward, especially if they can document what they're saying. And that doesn't mean that people who can't document aren't telling the truth, but as far as providing the kind of motivation on the part of the public to accept that this is real, there is a kind of an obligation. The old extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof, and at least some indication that people can rely on what they're saying.
I definitely agree with that statement you just said, that the absence of evidence definitely doesn't mean there's evidence of absence. And yes, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, but there's certain things that you have to look outside the box for those answers. I think this topic is a little harder, actually a lot harder than anyone else, because of the fact that you don't have as much evidence to deal with. And then more so, you have a lot of people who make up experiences to sort of fit in, and you have to weed those people out. Now, Tracy, in your step to find the ultimate cases and your association with Bud Hopkins, which ultimately led you to having the series of Intruders, the television series, which was based on Debbie, so you saw the process with Bud yourself. Didn't you see how many people had to be weeded out in that process before they got to the level of getting to hypnotic regression?
Oh, that's an excellent point, and that's even more true today than it was back then, because so many people now have heard about these stories, and the possibility that they've been influenced by that, even unconsciously, is much stronger. And you're absolutely right. I mean, that was one of the main things even back in those days, was separate the wheat from the chaff and to separate the true people of experience from people that were sort of wannabes or had fantasies or delusions. And that still remains very, very true with abductions. You really have to be very careful with the experience and make sure that the experience is a real one. But what I did discover was that there was a subculture of people in America and around the world that had had this experience, that didn't want to have this experience. In most cases, they were very reluctant participants in it, which is one of the main problems that I have with the whole abduction process, is that I don't think people are asked their permission to be a part of the abduction experience. They're basically taken whether they like it or not, which basically makes them victims in a lot of ways. And I do believe that. I believe that most abductees are actually victims, and it's not always a very pleasant experience.
Exactly why so many people have post-traumatic stress symptoms following these, because not only do they not ask to be a part of the process, they don't ask to be taken at the times they do, driving or sleeping. I just can't even imagine, to begin to imagine the amount of trauma that they go through. But what I can tell you is my experience of seeing each person that steps forward and tells their experiences, the amount of support they have amongst others skyrockets. And then so does the probability that the others around them will come out and do the same thing. And the prime example I have is when Dr. Lear, our beloved but departed Dr. Roger Lear, before he passed, we did 2 documentaries, the first one being the Alien Human Project. And we needed 3 people that had been abducted. Nobody really wanted to come forward except one who was very outspoken at the time, who had had something removed. But one of them was a member of CERO, and she asked that her name not be revealed and be filmed in silhouette. We did that. After that release of that first documentary, all her friends, others from the CERO support group, said, well, if she can go out and tell her story, so can I. They came forward and told their story without being in silhouette and with their real names being used. That ended up spawning a whole new set of people that came forward and were inspired to tell their story. And to date, there's been almost 20 that we put on camera who would have never have done so if it wasn't for the pioneers, people such as yourself, Travis. So with that being said, each time one of you speaks or the other, such as you, Tracy, has the opportunity to put their story on the big screen, you truly inspire them. Now, over the 40 years, Travis, that you have been dealing with this, because this story of yours made headlines the moment it happened, how many people have you seen that told you privately that they were taken, essentially come forward publicly that they were taken afterwards?
Now, what was the question again? How many people who confided in
over the years that the people that over the years from the moment you started talking about your case publicly, that people confided into you that they were also abducted? How many have you seen over the course of, despite however many years, even if up to 40, finally come out and speak openly?
There's been a few. I can't really name names, but there's been quite a few, and the whole issue of skepticism in good cases versus bad cases, I know there's a lot of people who come to me who report experiences that that I believe are sincere, that it's a real event. But at the same time, I think there's some who are sincere who probably didn't experience something on the same level that I did, and that's one of the kind of the false perceptions, false representations that the skeptical people try to portray about the UFO field, is that the investigators are just blindly accepting everything, and the truth is, that most of the organizations, most of the investigators probably reject the majority of the cases. The higher percentage are ones they don't accept. because of this phenomenon you're talking about, this imitation or copycat thing, or even a subconscious sort of influence, where they're not deliberately being deceptive. They believe something happened that didn't. So,
sorry, Travis, John in London. I was wondering, is there, of the cases that you've met, of people that come up to you and confide in you with their, their personal experience, is there any one particular one that stands out among the rest to you?
Yes, but like I said, I'm not going to get into naming names. There are some that I think are just absolutely BS, and there's some that I think are solid, but I'm not going to get into the situation where I'm sorting the wheat from the chaff, because I always swore that I would not do that unless I had thoroughly investigated the case, because you really don't have the right to do so unless you've, get the facts first. That was what I really, felt the most outrage about, was people that were judging our report and they hadn't even looked at the facts. They didn't have any idea, what was claimed or reported or anything, and they're already attacking it. So,
While I respect your anonymity to your certain friends and people that have confided, you say there are some cases where things have stuck out that you put down as possibly this is genuine rather than, chaff and wheat separating it. But with the situation that you were in, it's a very unique situation. There's not a lot of people that do come forward like yourself. What is it that made the individuals that have come to you over the years stand out, without putting names to it? But is it because of something that you've experienced that no one else can experience that? Is there anything that you can give us, because there are many people all around the world, including myself, who's been into your case for many years and has always wanted to ask hundreds of questions, but obviously I realise we're very short on time, and I just really wanted to get your perspective of it. What is so different about an alien abduction compared to, say, a military abduction, or just being abducted in the general sense? What's different that is real and it's not made up?
Well, it's kind of like the definition of obscenity. You know it when you see it. And it's different every time, I would hesitate to, lay out a description of what would pass in that regard.
For very good reason, I could imagine, and especially what you just said earlier, that not to make any presumptions about any case until you looked at everything, because you've been the butt of those very same jokes from people such as Philip Klass, which surprisingly, or very sad to have seen that, but not surprisingly, all their arguments and claims were always without merit, always circular reasoning. Tracy, just as I posed the same question earlier to Travis, you too are a rock star, a hero amongst people who have been taken, because you took the most important case, or one of, if not the most important cases, the Travis Walton story, and put it on the big screen, and therefore gave it a voice where otherwise it wouldn't have had such a voice. I'm sure you too have also been confided with so many people who want their cases either to be, at least to be heard by somebody else, or I'm sure you get so many requests, more than anybody I would imagine in this film business in Hollywood, to make a film about their cases. And that sort of leads into the 701 question. I was just wondering, I know what that number means. I know everyone else here knows what that number means, but everybody listening may not know. Can you talk briefly about what that means?
Well, thank you for the kind words, by the way, Dr. J. But yes, 701 was the Air Force study that went on from 1947 to, I believe, 1969. One of the things that we've discovered in doing research for this film is that so many cases were labeled explained that the Air Force investigated, but were really not explained. An example would be there'd be a sighting, the Air Force would say, oh, the planet Jupiter was very bright that night, we think it was the planet Jupiter. Then an astronomer would come forward a couple days later and say, Jupiter wasn't even visible on that side of the Earth at that time. But the Air Force would not then take off the explained category and admit that it was now unexplained. They would maintain that it was explained. So there are a number of cases that are listed as explained, which are silly. I mean, they really just don't stand the test of time. But even despite that, when the Air Force shut down Project Blue Book in 1969, they admitted to having 701 unexplained cases. And when they say a case was unexplained, it was really unexplained. It was something where they had tried desperately by hook or by crook to give it an explanation, and it still had no explanation. So we thought calling the film 701 was kind of like an inside joke sort of amongst us, by saying this is kind of a classic example of how the subject as a whole has not been adequately explained. And that's why we chose the number as the title of the movie.
I think one great thing that everyone needs to remember is in terms of skeptics, debunkers, or the government as a whole, we only need one. They have 701 that they labeled as unexplained. We just take one of those and prove it as to be what it is. If it's extraterrestrial, extra-dimensional, and the whole argument is one. And that's why I think it's so good to have such a high number that they stamped. Because, as you mentioned, they really tried to debunk everything. As Hynek said at the end when he finished his Project Blue Book tenure, said that when he created the swamp gas explanation, he really was trying to find something. What's the most absurd explanation you've seen when you were going through the reports of Blue Book to do research for your next movie?